The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from 47 different species took their seats. The massive chamber could hold thousands, but today, only the most important representatives were present. At the center of the room, two humans sat alone at a small table, looking very out of place among the colorful array of alien forms. Commander Jake Miller adjusted his uniform and tried to ignore the stares. Next to him, Captain Lisa Hayes reviewed her notes one last time. They both knew this meeting would not go well for humanity. The Zephyrian delegate stood first. His blue skin shimmered as he activated the holographic display above the assembly floor. Images of recent battles filled the air, showing human soldiers in action during the Kepler mining conflict. Honored members of the Council, the Zephyrian, began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's translation systems. We gather today to address a serious problem. The humans have repeatedly shown they cannot follow proper military protocols. The hologram changed to show human troops charging directly into enemy positions. The alien delegates murmured among themselves as they watched soldiers ignore cover and run straight at heavily fortified bunkers. Look at this footage, the Zephyrian continued. Standard doctrine calls for a coordinated approach with air support and artillery preparation. Instead, these humans simply run forward, taking massive casualties for no tactical gain. Jake wanted to explain that the charge had actually saved 300 civilian miners, but he knew it would not matter. The Council had already made up their minds. The crystalline Nexari representative took the floor next. Her body looked like living diamond, refracting light as she moved. My people value logical decision-making above all else. We calculate risks, plan every move, and execute with precision. Humans do the opposite. More footage appeared, showing human ships breaking formation during a space battle. The aliens watched as human vessels ignored their assigned positions and scattered in what looked like complete chaos. This behavior endangered our entire fleet, the Nexari said. They were given clear orders to maintain formation and provide covering fire. Instead, they acted independently, forcing our commanders to adjust their carefully planned strategies. The Draknari war minister rose from his seat. He was twice the size of any human, with thick armor plates covering his body and 4 powerful arms. His species had a reputation as fierce warriors, which made his next words even more damaging. My people respect courage in battle, he rumbled. But what humans show is not courage, it is madness. They throw away their lives and the lives of others for emotional reasons, not strategic ones. The hologram showed a human squad leader ordering his men to rescue wounded soldiers in an exposed position. The aliens watched as several humans died, trying to save their injured comrades. Any logical commander would leave the wounded and complete the mission, the Draknari continued. Instead, humans risk everything to save individuals who may not even survive. This is not military thinking. This is primitive emotion controlling supposedly trained soldiers. Jake gripped the edge of the table. He remembered that battle. The wounded soldiers they saved had provided crucial intelligence that won the war. But explaining this would sound like making excuses. One by one, other delegates stood to share similar stories. The insect-like Thraxians showed footage of humans ignoring surrender demands and fighting to the last man. The energy beings called Luxari displayed recordings of human pilots ramming their ships into enemy vessels instead of retreating to fight another day. Each piece of evidence painted the same picture. Humans were unpredictable, emotional, and dangerous to work with. They ignored orders, took unnecessary risks, and made decisions based on feelings rather than logic. Finally, the Council's Supreme Chancellor called for testimony from the human representatives. Jake stood slowly, knowing that anything he said would be used against his species. Honored Council members, he began. Humanity has always been willing to make sacrifices for the greater good. Sometimes this means taking risks that others might not understand. The Zephyrian delegate interrupted. You call it sacrifice. We call it waste. How many human lives could have been saved with proper planning and logical decision-making? Lisa tried to help. Our methods may seem unusual, but they get results. The conflicts we've been involved in were won, and civilian casualties were kept to a minimum. At what cost? The Nixari asked. Your own casualties were triple what they should have been with proper tactics. The debate continued for hours, but Jake could see it was hopeless. The aliens had decided that humans were too dangerous to include in future military operations. They saw human adaptability as chaos, human sacrifice as waste, and human determination as primitive emotion. The vote was unanimous. Humans were banned from all combat operations within galactic space. They could still serve in support roles, medical aid, engineering, logistics, but they would no longer be allowed to make tactical decisions or lead military units. Admiral Peter Stone was waiting when Jake and Lisa returned to Earth Station Alpha. The old soldier listened quietly as they reported the Council's decision. Around them, human officers and crew members tried to continue their duties, but everyone knew something important had just ended. They think we're barbarians, Lisa said bitterly. They see our sacrifices as meaningless waste. Stone nodded slowly. Maybe it's better this way. Let them handle their own wars with their perfect logic and calculated risks. We'll find other ways to serve. But Jake could see the disappointment in the Admiral's eyes. Humanity had wanted to be part of something bigger, to help protect the galaxy alongside other species. Instead, they were being pushed aside, labeled as too primitive and too dangerous for civilized warfare. Back in the Grand Assembly Hall, the alien delegates congratulated themselves on their wise decision. The Draknari War Minister laughed as he spoke with other representatives. Imagine if we had let them continue, he said. Their reckless methods would have gotten us all killed eventually. Better to use them for supply runs and medical support. Leave the real fighting to professionals. The other aliens agreed. They had prevented a disaster by keeping humans out of future conflicts. Their logical, calculated approach to warfare was clearly superior to human emotion and chaos. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, none of them noticed the concerned expression on the face of young Zephyrian officer who had been taking notes. He had studied human military history, and something about their tactics bothered him. What the Council saw as random chaos looked almost like something else to him, but he could not quite figure out what. The ban was now in effect. Humans would no longer participate in galactic military operations. The Council members returned to their homeworlds, confident they had made the right decision. They had no idea how wrong they were. 6 months had passed since the ban on human military participation. The galaxy had enjoyed a period of relative peace, with the various alien species handling security matters using their proven logical methods. The Galactic Council congratulated itself on maintaining order, without the unpredictable human element. That peace shattered when the long-range sensor arrays detected something impossible. Dr. Helen Park was working late in her laboratory aboard the research vessel New Horizon when the first alerts came through. As a human xenobiologist, she was restricted to studying alien plant samples and helping with agricultural development. The work was important, but far from the excitement of her previous assignments studying combat-related biological threats. The emergency klaxon made her look up from her microscope. Through the ship's communication system, she heard Captain Ryan Foster's voice calling all personnel to stations. Helen made her way to the bridge where the human crew was staring at their sensor displays with expressions of disbelief. "What is it?" Helen asked. Foster pointed to the main screen, which showed a formation of ships unlike anything in the galactic database. They were massive, dark vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ships moved in perfect geometric patterns, their movements too precise to be controlled by biological beings. "The Krillian Empire," Foster said quietly. "The machines are back." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. Every species in the galaxy knew the stories of the Krillians. They were an ancient machine civilization that had disappeared thousands of years ago after a brief but devastating war with the early galactic civilizations. Most people believed they were extinct. The first contact occurred at Celestia Prime, a mining world on the outer rim. The planet's defense force consisted of 2 Zephyrian cruisers and a Draknari battle group. They followed standard protocol, broadcasting warnings and positioning themselves in defensive formation. The Krillian response was swift and terrifying. The lead Krillian vessel analyzed the defensive formation for exactly 3 minutes. Then, it fired a single weapon that passed harmlessly through the Zephyrian shields and disabled both cruisers without destroying them. The Draknari commander immediately ordered a full assault, sending his ships forward in their traditional berserker charge. The Krillians adapted to this tactic in real time. Their ships reconfigured their weapons and shields, turning the Draknari's own momentum against them. What should have been a devastating attack became a trap, with the Draknari ships finding themselves surrounded and systematically dismantled. Within hours, Celestia Prime had fallen. The Krillians didn't destroy the planet or kill the population. Instead, they studied everything: the defensive strategies, the weapons technology, the ship designs. Then they moved on, leaving behind monitoring stations to continue gathering data. General Vextar of the Zephyrian High Command took personal control of the response. He was considered one of the finest military minds in the galaxy, with centuries of experience in strategic planning. He assembled a massive fleet and developed a complex battle plan designed to exploit what he believed were weaknesses in Krillian tactics. The battle at the Helix Nebula was a disaster. The Krillians analyzed Vextar's strategy during the first engagement and began countering every move before it was completed. Energy weapons that worked in the first minutes of battle became useless, as the enemy ships adapted their defenses. Tactics that had succeeded for centuries were rendered obsolete in real time. Helen watched the battle reports with growing horror. The New Horizon had been assigned to evacuate civilians from threatened worlds, giving her a front-row seat to the unfolding catastrophe. Each engagement followed the same pattern: initial success, then adaptation, then defeat. "They're learning," she told Captain Foster as they reviewed the latest reports. "Not just learning, they're evolving their tactics faster than we can change ours." Foster nodded grimly. "The Nexari tried their hive mind approach last week. Shared consciousness, perfect coordination, thousands of ships acting as one. The Krillians figured out how to jam their collective thinking within hours, turned their greatest strength into a liability. The fortress world of Bastion 7 fell after a 3-day siege. This should have been impossible. Bastion 7 was considered impregnable, with defense systems built by the greatest military engineers of 6 different species. The Krillians studied the defenses methodically, testing each system until they found the optimal approach. Then, they executed a surgical assault that bypassed every safeguard. Back on Earth Station Alpha, Admiral Stone received increasingly desperate communications from the Galactic Council. They weren't asking for human military help. The ban was still in effect. But they needed more medical ships, more supply vessels, more engineering support for the growing refugee crisis. Stone assigned every available human ship to refugee duty. Captain Amy Rodriguez found herself commanding a medical frigate, treating survivors from dozens of different battles. The stories they told were all the same: logical tactics failing, proven strategies crumbling, and the Krillians getting stronger with each victory. "They don't just win," a wounded Draknari officer told Amy. "They learn from winning. Every battle makes them harder to beat in the next one." Amy filed her reports with Stone, noting something the alien commanders seemed to miss. In her medical interviews with survivors, she found a pattern. The Krillians excelled against predictable, organized responses. They struggled, briefly, when faced with unexpected actions, things that didn't fit standard military doctrine. There was this one human supply ship, a Zephyrian pilot told her, completely unarmed, just carrying medical supplies. When the Krillians attacked, instead of running or surrendering, the human captain rammed his ship into their formation. Made no sense tactically, but it confused them for almost a full minute before they adapted. Amy made note of this and similar stories. Humans weren't supposed to be fighting, but their support ships sometimes found themselves in combat situations. When they did, their actions seemed to briefly disrupt Krillian adaptation patterns. The breakthrough came when 3 major core worlds faced simultaneous invasion. The proud capital systems of the Zephyrians, Nexari, and Draknari were all under direct attack. Panic spread through the Galactic Council as they realized their most important worlds might fall within days. Emergency session after emergency session produced no solutions. Every strategy they developed had already been tried and countered. The Krillians were simply too good at learning and adapting to conventional warfare. Finally, in desperation, the Council voted to lift the ban on human military participation. Not as equals, humans would serve as auxiliary support under alien command, but their help was needed. Admiral Stone listened to the Council's offer via subspace communication. The alien representative spoke carefully, trying not to sound too desperate. They still believed human tactics were primitive and chaotic, but they were running out of options. "We appreciate your willingness to allow human participation," Stone replied diplomatically. "However, if humanity is to fight, we must be allowed to use our own tactical doctrines under human command. We can coordinate with your forces, but we cannot be effective while constrained by alien strategic frameworks." The silence that followed stretched for several minutes. Finally, the Supreme Chancellor responded. "Very well. Desperate times call for desperate measures. You may deploy your forces as you see fit, Admiral Stone, but understand that the fate of the galaxy may depend on your success." Lieutenant Ben Carter received his deployment orders aboard the human destroyer Texas. Around him, his crewmates prepared for battle with mixed emotions. They were finally getting their chance to prove that human military methods had value, but the situation looked hopeless. The Krillians had defeated every logical, well-planned strategy the galaxy's finest minds could devise. How could human chaos succeed where perfect order had failed? Ben didn't know the answer to that question, but he was about to find out. The human fleet arrived at the Meridian system, just as the Krillian advance force began its assault on 3 heavily defended worlds. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of his flagship, the heavy cruiser Liberty, watching the tactical displays with calm attention. Around him, his officers waited for orders that would either prove human worth or confirm alien suspicions about their primitive methods. The alien fleet commanders had positioned themselves according to standard defensive doctrine. The Zephyrian ships formed a protective screen around the most valuable targets, while Draknari vessels prepared for coordinated assault runs. Nixari support ships maintained formation, ready to provide precisely calculated fire support at optimal intervals. "Admiral," came the voice of General Vextar over the communication channel. "Human vessels will take position in Sector 7 and await coordination instructions. We have developed a comprehensive battle plan that maximizes our combined effectiveness." Stone looked at the battle plan displayed on his screen. It was perfect by conventional standards. Every ship assigned a specific role, every movement timed to the second, every contingency accounted for. It was exactly the kind of logical, predictable strategy that the Krillians had been defeating for months. "General Vextar," Stone replied politely, "we appreciate your planning efforts. However, human forces will be operating under independent command authority. We will coordinate with your fleet, but we cannot be effective while following predetermined patterns." The silence that followed told Stone everything he needed to know about how the aliens viewed this decision. They thought he was making a terrible mistake, but they were too desperate to argue. "All human ships," Stone announced on the fleet-wide channel, "you have your mission parameters. Stop the Krillian advance by any means necessary. Individual captains are authorized to use their own judgment regarding tactical implementation. Execute." Captain Kevin Brooks of the cruiser Montana received the order with a mixture of excitement and terror. He had studied the reports from previous battles, watching how the Krillians systematically countered every conventional tactic, but now he was free to try something different. "Helm," Brooks ordered. "Plot a direct course for the largest Krillian vessel, maximum speed." His bridge crew exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of reckless behavior that had gotten humans banned from military operations. But they trusted their captain. The Montana broke formation and charged directly at the Krillian flagship, ignoring the coordinated defense plan completely. The alien commanders watched in horror as the human ship headed straight into what looked like a suicide run. The Krillians reacted as expected. They analyzed the Montana's approach vector and began calculating the optimal response to destroy the attacking ship. Their weapons locked on, their shields configured for maximum defensive efficiency against the anticipated ramming attack. But Brooks had no intention of ramming. At the last possible second, the Montana executed a series of impossible turns, using its momentum to slingshot around the Krillian vessel, while its sensors recorded detailed information about the enemy ship's shield frequencies and weapon configurations. The maneuver cost the Montana half its armor plating and left its port engine damaged, but the intelligence gathered was invaluable. Brooks transmitted the data to his fellow captains just as the Krillians finished adapting to his failed attack. Captain Susan Wells of the Denver received the data and immediately put it to use. Her ship was smaller and faster than the Montana, perfect for what she had in mind. Instead of attacking the same target, she selected a different Krillian vessel and began what looked like another suicidal charge. The Krillians had learned from the Montana's attack. They adjusted their defensive patterns to account for last-second course changes. Their weapons tracked the Denver's approach, ready to destroy it before it could gather more intelligence. Wells had anticipated this adaptation. Instead of changing course, she maintained her collision trajectory right up to the moment of impact. But the Denver wasn't trying to ram the Krillian ship. It was trying to get close enough to launch something. The explosion that followed looked like a ship destruction, but it was actually a carefully shaped charge that breached the Krillian vessel's hull in exactly the right location. Through the breach came a team of human Marines in powered armor, led by Sergeant Gary Johnson. The boarding action that followed was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of following standard breach protocols, the humans scattered throughout the Krillian ship, each Marine acting independently. They weren't trying to capture control rooms or disable primary systems. They were gathering information and causing as much confusion as possible before the inevitable counterattack. Johnson's team managed to access a Krillian data node for 37 seconds before being forced to retreat. In those 37 seconds, they downloaded tactical information that revealed how the Krillian adaptation systems worked. The knowledge cost them their lives, but Johnson transmitted the data before his suit's power failed. Captain Frank Miller of the destroyer Phoenix received Johnson's transmission just as his own ship came under attack. Miller was known throughout the human fleet for his unconventional thinking, and the Krillian data gave him an idea that was either brilliant or insane. Instead of trying to outfight the Krillians, Miller decided to outconfuse them. He began a series of attacks that made no tactical sense whatsoever. His ship would fire at one target, then immediately break off to ram another, only to change course again and launch torpedoes at a third vessel. The pattern was so random that the Krillians couldn't find anything to adapt to. Every time they began to counter one attack, Miller was already doing something completely different. His ship took massive damage, but it bought precious time for other human vessels to position themselves. Lieutenant Maria Santos led a bomber squadron from the carrier New York. She watched Miller's seemingly chaotic attack run and suddenly understood what he was doing. The confusion wasn't random. It was cover. Santos led her bombers in a precision strike on the Krillian command vessel, using Miller's chaos as a distraction. Her attack looked like just another part of the random human assault, but it was actually carefully planned to disable the central coordination node that managed Krillian adaptation protocols. The effect was immediate. For the first time in months, Krillian vessels began responding to attacks with delay. Their perfect coordination faltered as individual ships had to make tactical decisions without constant updates from the Central Intelligence. Captain Linda Gray of the battleship California saw the opportunity and seized it. She had been studying Krillian response patterns during the entire battle, waiting for the right moment to strike. With their coordination disrupted, the enemy fleet was vulnerable to exactly the kind of multi-vector assault that Gray specialized in. But Gray's assault was different from Miller's chaos. What looked like 12 separate random attacks was actually a carefully orchestrated sequence designed to force the Krillians into a specific adaptation pattern. Each individual attack was precisely timed to create a cascade effect that would leave the entire enemy fleet vulnerable for exactly 12 seconds. Gray had sacrificed 11 ships' primary weapon systems and accepted the complete destruction of the destroyer Dallas to create those 12 seconds. When the moment came, Every remaining human ship fired simultaneously at targets selected not for their strategic value, but for their position in the Krillian formation. The enemy fleet, still trying to adapt to what they thought were random attacks, suddenly found themselves facing a coordinated assault that exploited a vulnerability they didn't even know they had. In 12 seconds, the humans crippled half the Krillian advance force. For the first time since the invasion began, a Krillian fleet retreated. The alien commanders watched in stunned silence as the impossible happened. The humans had not only survived against the Krillians, they had actually won. Ships that should have been destroyed were still fighting. Tactics that looked like complete chaos had somehow produced victory. General Vextar found himself staring at tactical displays. That made no sense. According to every principle of military science he knew, the human fleet should have been annihilated in the first 10 minutes of combat. Instead, they had achieved something that months of logical planning had failed to accomplish. How? Was all he could manage to say when Admiral Stone's image appeared on his communication screen. Stone's expression was calm, almost matter-of-fact. "Different approach, General. Sometimes the best way to fight a logical enemy is to be illogical." But even as he spoke, Stone knew the real explanation was far more complex than that. What the aliens had seen as chaos was actually a sophisticated form of warfare that operated on principles they didn't understand. Human tactics weren't random. They were adaptive in a way that made them appear random to observers who expected rigid patterns. The victory at Meridian was just the beginning. The Krillians would learn from this defeat and adapt their strategies. But for the first time since the invasion began, there was hope that they could be beaten. The question was whether the Galactic Council would understand what they had just witnessed, or if they would continue to see human methods. The victory at Meridian sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time since the Krillian invasion began, an enemy fleet had retreated. The news spread quickly through the galactic communication networks, bringing hope to billions of beings who had begun to believe that defeat was inevitable. But the victory came at a cost that made many alien observers question whether it had been worth it. Human casualty reports showed numbers that would have been unacceptable to any other military force. 3 ships completely destroyed, 7 more damaged beyond immediate repair, and over 200 human lives lost in a single engagement. General Vextar studied the battle reports with growing confusion. By every measure of military efficiency he understood, the human victory had been a disaster. The casualties were enormous, the resource expenditure was staggering, and the tactical methods appeared to violate every principle of sound strategy. Yet, somehow it had worked. "I need to understand how they did this," Vextar told his staff officers during the post-battle analysis. "Review every piece of sensor data from the engagement. I want to know what we missed." The review took 3 days, and produced more questions than answers. The human ships had indeed acted chaotically, but there were patterns hidden within the chaos. Actions that looked random were actually responses to Krillian movements that happened seconds later, as if the humans had been predicting enemy reactions. Meanwhile, Admiral Stone was dealing with his own analysis problems. The victory had been costly, and he knew the Krillians would adapt their strategies for the next encounter. Human methods worked because they were unpredictable, but that unpredictability came from the individual initiative of ship commanders, not from any grand strategic plan. "We can't fight the same way twice," Stone told his senior captains during a secure conference call. "The Krillians will be expecting chaos now. They'll develop counters for unpredictable tactics." Captain Kevin Brooks, still recovering from injuries sustained aboard the Montana, spoke up from his medical bay. "What if that's exactly what we want them to do? Let them prepare for chaos while we do something completely different." The idea was intriguing. If the Krillians adapted their systems to handle unpredictable human tactics, they might become vulnerable to perfectly predictable ones. But it would require a level of coordination that seemed to go against everything that made human methods effective. Dr. Helen Park had been following the military discussions with professional interest. As a xenobiologist, she understood adaptive systems better than most military officers. The Krillians weren't just learning from defeats, they were evolving their entire strategic framework based on each encounter. "Admiral," She contacted Stone directly. I think I understand what makes our tactics work against them. The Krillians process information faster than any biological mind, but they assume that all intelligent behavior follows logical patterns. When we act illogically, we're not just being unpredictable. We're operating outside their fundamental understanding of how intelligent beings should behave. Stone considered this carefully. If Helen was right, then human effectiveness against the Krillians wasn't just about being unpredictable. It was about thinking in ways that machine intelligence couldn't comprehend. The next test of this theory came at the Outer Reach systems, where a second Krillian fleet was advancing on colonial worlds. This time, the aliens were ready to work, with human forces from the beginning, rather than treating them as unpredictable auxiliaries. Admiral Stone proposed a joint operation, but with a twist. The alien fleets would execute a perfectly logical, textbook assault on the Krillian positions. Meanwhile, human forces would do something that appeared to contradict the alien strategy, while actually supporting it in ways the Krillians couldn't predict. The battle began exactly as planned. Zephyrian cruisers took positions for long-range bombardment. Nixari vessels coordinated precision strikes and Draknari ships prepared for assault runs. The Krillians began adapting to these familiar patterns immediately, adjusting their defenses to counter logical tactics. Then the humans arrived, and everything went wrong in the most right way possible. Captain Susan Wells, now commanding the IFO, rebuilt Denver, led the first human attack. Instead of supporting the alien bombardment, she took her ship directly into the crossfire between the two fleets. To the Krillians, this looked like a tactical error that would result in the Denver being destroyed by friendly fire. Instead, Wells used the alien bombardment as cover for a mining operation. Her ship deployed a series of devices that looked like standard mines but were actually sophisticated sensor packages. The Krillians barely noticed them, focused as they were on countering the main alien assault. Lieutenant Ben Carter, now promoted to captain of the destroyer Texas, followed, up with what appeared to be a completely separate attack on a different part of the Krillian formation. His assault looked uncoordinated with both the alien strategy and Wells' mining operation. But Carter's attack was carefully timed to drive the Krillian ships into specific positions where Wells's sensor packages could gather detailed intelligence about their adaptive systems. The data flowed to Captain Linda Gray aboard the California, who was preparing the most audacious part of the human strategy. Gray's battleship had been modified with experimental weapon systems that were designed not to destroy Krillian vessels but to confuse their sensors. When the weapons fired, they created false readings that made the Krillian ships think they were under attack from directions where no human vessels existed. The effect was devastating. The Krillians began adapting to phantom attacks, reconfiguring their defenses against weapons that weren't actually being used. Meanwhile, the real human assault came from completely unexpected angles, using conventional weapons that the Krillians had dismissed as insignificant. General Vextar watched this unfold with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. The human tactics still looked chaotic, but there was an underlying structure that he was beginning to recognize. Each apparently random action was actually part of a larger pattern designed to manipulate Krillian responses. They're not just being unpredictable, he told his staff. They're making the enemy predictable. The realization was profound. While every other species in the galaxy had been trying to outthink the Krillians, humans had been working to make the Krillians overthink themselves. By acting in ways that seemed irrational, they forced the machine intelligence to waste processing power on solutions to problems that didn't actually exist. The battle ended with another Krillian retreat, but this time, the victory came at a much lower cost in human lives. The lessons learned at Meridian had been applied to create a more efficient form of organized chaos. Admiral Stone received a communication request from General Vextar shortly after the battle ended. The Zephyrian commander's image appeared on Stone's screen, and for the first time since the war began, Vextar looked hopeful. Admiral Stone, Vextar said, I believe I'm beginning to understand your methods. What we initially saw as primitive emotion is actually a sophisticated approach to psychological warfare. You're not just fighting the Krillian ships, you're fighting their decision-making processes. Stone nodded. Every intelligent system has assumptions about how other intelligent systems should behave. The Krillians assume that all warfare follows logical patterns because that's how their minds work. When we violate those assumptions, we force them to waste resources trying to understand behavior that doesn't need to be understood, just executed. The conversation marked a turning point in the relationship between human and alien forces. For the first time, the other species began to see human tactics not as chaotic barbarism, but as a different approach to the same problems they were all trying to solve. But even as understanding grew between the allied forces, the Krillians were adapting too. Intelligence reports suggested that the machine empire was developing new strategies specifically designed to counter human unpredictability. The next engagement would test whether human methods could continue to evolve faster than Krillian adaptation. Captain Frank Miller, recovering from wounds sustained in the Outer Reach battle, summed up the situation during a briefing with his fellow commanders. They're learning to expect the unexpected from us. So what do we do when the enemy starts predicting our unpredictability? Admiral Stone smiled grimly. We do what humans do best. We adapt. The Grand Assembly Hall looked exactly the same as it had 6 months earlier, but everything else had changed. The same delegates who had banned humans from military service now gathered to hear how those same humans had achieved what their combined fleets could not: meaningful victories against the Krillian Empire. Admiral Stone stood at the same small table where Commander Jake Miller and Captain Lisa Hayes had sat during the original hearing. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Instead of condemnation, there was curiosity. Instead of certainty, there were questions that demanded answers. The Draknari War Minister was the first to speak. His massive form seemed smaller, somehow diminished by recent defeats and the growing realization that his understanding of warfare might be flawed. Admiral Stone, he rumbled, my people have studied the reports from Meridian and Outer Reach. We cannot comprehend how your forces achieved victory where ours failed. Your casualty rates should have been unacceptable. Your tactics appeared to violate every principle of sound military doctrine. Yet you succeeded. The Zephyrian delegate nodded in agreement. Our analysis shows that human ships took damage at rates far exceeding normal operational parameters. By any logical measure, your commanders should have withdrawn from combat to preserve their forces. Instead, they continued fighting despite catastrophic losses. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The crystalline Nexari representative activated a holographic display showing casualty figures from recent battles. The numbers were stark. Human forces consistently suffered losses that would have caused any other species to retreat or surrender. We do not understand, the Nexari said, her diamond-like body refracting light as she moved. How such apparent waste of resources can be considered effective strategy. Stone looked around the chamber, seeing the same mixture of confusion and skepticism that had greeted humans months earlier. But now there was something else, a desperate need to understand. The galaxy was still at war, and conventional methods were still failing against Krillian forces. Honored delegates, Stone began, you asked to understand our methods. The best way to do that is to show you what actually happened during those battles. What you interpreted as chaos and waste was actually precision strategy, executed at a level of complexity that appears random to outside observers. He activated his own holographic display, showing the opening moments of the Meridian battle. The delegates watched Captain Kevin Brooks's cruiser Montana charging directly at the largest Krillian vessel, just as they had seen in previous footage of human recklessness. This is exactly the kind of suicidal behavior we banned, the Draknari War Minister said. One ship attacking a superior force with no support and no logical chance of success. Stone paused the display and zoomed in on the tactical readouts. Watch the sensor data more carefully. Captain Brooks wasn't attempting to destroy the enemy vessel. He was conducting a high-speed reconnaissance mission. The display highlighted the Montana's sensor sweeps, showing how Brooks had used his ship's approach to gather detailed intelligence about Krillian shield frequencies, weapon configurations, and defensive patterns. The data streams flowed to other human ships in real time. The apparent suicide run was actually a precisely calculated intelligence-gathering operation, Stone explained. Captain Brooks knew his ship would take damage, and he accepted that, Cost because the information was more valuable than the ship. The Zephyrian delegate studied the data streams. But the risk was enormous. If the ship had been destroyed, the intelligence would have been lost. Which is why it wasn't a suicide run, Stone replied. Brooks calculated the exact approach angle needed to survive the initial attack and gather the data. The maneuver only looked reckless to observers who didn't understand its true purpose. He advanced the display to show Captain Susan Wells's attack on the Denver. Once again, the delegates saw what appeared to be another human ship attempting a suicidal ramming attack. Another waste of resources, the Dreknari muttered, throwing away a perfectly good vessel for no strategic gain. Stone shook his head. Watch more closely. The Denver wasn't trying to ram the Krillian ship, it was trying to get close enough to deploy something. The display revealed the true nature of Wells's attack. A precisely timed insertion of human marines directly into the enemy vessel. The explosion that followed wasn't ship destruction. It was a shaped charge designed to create a specific breach in the Krillian hull. Captain Wells sacrificed her ship's combat capability to deliver a boarding team to exactly the right location, Stone explained. The intelligence they gathered in 37 seconds was worth more than any conventional attack could have achieved. Delegate after delegate watched as Stone revealed the hidden complexity behind each apparently chaotic human action. What looked like random destruction was actually sophisticated coordination. What appeared to be emotional decision-making was actually split-second tactical analysis. The most stunning revelation came when Stone showed them Captain Linda Gray's final assault. The delegates had seen the footage before. 12 human ships, appearing to attack random targets simultaneously, with devastating casualties and no apparent coordination. This looked like complete madness, the Nexari representative said. 12 separate attacks with no unified strategy. Stone smiled grimly. It was unified. Watch the timing. The display showed the attacks frame by frame, revealing microsecond-level coordination. Each ship's assault was precisely timed to force the Krillian fleet into specific responses. The pattern was so complex that it required destroying one ship entirely and crippling 11 others just to create a 12-second window of vulnerability. Captain Gray didn't order 12 random attacks, Stone explained. She orchestrated a single unified assault disguised as chaos. The Krillians couldn't adapt to it because they couldn't recognize it as a coordinated strategy until it was too late. The silence in the chamber stretched for several minutes. The alien delegates stared at the tactical displays, trying to process what they had learned. What they had interpreted as primitive barbarism was actually warfare conducted at a level of sophistication they had never imagined. Finally, the Supreme Chancellor spoke. Are you telling us that human military doctrine deliberately creates the appearance of chaos to disguise advanced strategy? Among other things, Stone replied. Human tactics are based on adaptability rather than rigid planning. We train our officers to think independently and make split-second decisions based on constantly changing circumstances. What looks like emotional reaction is actually rapid tactical analysis. General Vextar, who had been studying human methods since the first victory, stood to address the assembly. I have worked directly with human forces in recent engagements. What the Admiral says is correct. Human commanders process tactical information and make strategic decisions at speeds that appear impossible. They sacrifice individual resources to achieve larger objectives that may not become apparent until the battle is over. The Dreknari War Minister looked troubled. But the casualties. How do you justify such losses? Stone's expression became serious. Every human who dies in battle dies because they chose to accept that risk for a greater purpose. We don't waste lives, we invest them. The difference is that we're willing to pay costs that others consider too high because we understand that some victories require sacrifice. The Nexari representative processed this information through her species' logical framework. You are saying that humans calculate acceptable losses differently than other species. You consider future strategic value more important than immediate tactical preservation. Exactly, Stone confirmed. We plan for victory, not survival. Sometimes, those are the same thing and sometimes they're not. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the tone was completely different from the original hearing. Instead of condemning human methods, the delegates were trying to understand them. Instead of dismissing human sacrifice as waste, they were beginning to recognize it as a different approach to the same strategic problems they all faced. The final vote was unanimous, but this time it went the other way. Not only was the ban on human military participation lifted, but the Council formally requested human tactical advisors to help develop new strategies against the Krillian threat. Admiral Stone accepted the appointment, but with conditions. Human advisors would work with alien commanders, but they wouldn't try to make other species fight like humans. Instead, they would help each species find ways to incorporate unpredictability and adaptive thinking into their own tactical doctrines. The last delegate to speak was the young Zephyrian officer, who had taken notes during the original hearing. He had been promoted since then, partly because his reports on human tactics had proven prescient. "Admiral Stone," he said, "6 months ago, we thought we were protecting the galaxy from human recklessness. Now I understand that we were actually protecting ourselves from recognizing our own limitations. Human methods work because they acknowledge that warfare is inherently chaotic and unpredictable. You've learned to use that chaos as a weapon." Stone nodded. "War isn't a mathematical equation that can be solved with perfect logic. It's a dynamic system that requires constant adaptation. Humans learned long ago that the most logical strategy is